Attorney Jacqueline Gomes knows that Don Juan Moses and she were told by the DHHS social worker that they were not to further discuss the fact that the older child of Jessica Pinkerton, who was not the biological son of Don Juan Moses, had showered with a registered sex offender, Jessica's uncle. That was off limits. Attorney Jacqueline Gomes was in no uncertain terms told, as was Don Juan Moses, presumably together, that they were to no longer inquire into the matter of the older half-brother to the two children in question concerning custody concerns and other parental rights and responsibilities issues. They were told not to get involved with the matter of this child being exposed to a registered sex offender. Now, when an attorney is advised by the DHHS not to inquire further into a fact that is stated by the DHHS itself on its own record, that she is not to inquire into a matter that the DHHS is under obligation to immediately report to the police. The fact that the attorney did not take seriously the immediate emergency of this child needing immediate police intervention. The fact that this attorney knows that DHHS workers are mandated reporters, if anyone is, but that she also is a mandated reporter dealing with children as an attorney. Anyone that deals with the children and their safety and concerns is a mandated reporter under the laws of the land, under the laws of every state. Jacqueline Gomes could deny having been warned by the social worker that she is not to discuss the older half-brother of the two children in question concerning Jessica and Don Juan Moses. She could deny having been told that and warned that by the DHHS worker. However, she cannot deny that because the DHHS was imprudent enough and clumsy enough to have not once, not twice, but in a number of cases, stated things that clearly proved that they should have further investigated the matter, which demonstrates their obvious bias. And I could stray to those different things, but I'll just touch very quickly on the fact that if Jessica says that he might have been defending himself when he hit me with his elbow when I was punching him in the car, that was an immediate red flag for anybody who's a true investigator of any kind, whether police or social worker, to find out, okay, let's see what happened. Why might he have been defending himself? Why were you attacking him? That question being put to her was never addressed by DHHS, nor by the attorney by the way. But let's get back to the point. The attorney, Jacqueline Gomes, cannot deny that she was told, don't be concerned about this older child having showered with a registered sex offender. Don Juan Moses wants to bring this up, but both of you need to stop addressing this. Presumably from that statement that we have on the DHHS record, it suggests that the attorney was beginning to address that concern. The attorney was initially apparently doing her job. What we have, however, as we look closely at this, is the fact that the DHHS, on record, clumsily states what essentially destroys the reputation of the DHHS. They have stated in their own records that which will incriminate themselves. They have done the work themselves of identifying treasonable, barbarous acts. Not only of permitting a perpetrator to continue to have access to a child, by refusing to identify it to the police, but permitting that perpetrator to have continued access to that child by hosting the event, by saying, yes, the child is babysat at that house still by the same babysitter who let that man already at that child in the shower. But the child is never there at night. Always, if he's in the area of Westbrook, he will be staying with his biological father, Mason Carter Toland's father, whatever his name is. Do you see the problem? It's conspicuously obvious to the citizens, but not so obvious to the state. And that's because they cannot afford to be honest enough to invite scrutiny into their own practices, to invite an internal investigation by the Attorney General's office. Jacqueline Gomes may deny having been warned by the DHHS not to broach or to address the fact that the older half-brother showered with Jessica's uncle, a registered sex offender. That, however, does not have any credibility if Jacqueline Gomes, the attorney, were to say that. Why? Because DHHS affirms that both parties, Don Juan Moses and his attorney, were instructed not to bring up the older child because he is not your son, Don Juan Moses. Don Juan Moses was personally told that also by a social worker. In addition to that, what happens later, as the crucial evidence that Jacqueline Gomes turns on Don Juan Moses, among several other crucial details, is we hear Jacqueline Gomes telling Don Juan Moses, you worry about your two children. Mason is not your son. She has played fully into the DHHS system, using and parroting the very same expression of DHHS. That is exactly what he was told by the social worker. Mason is not your son. You worry about your two children. That is the full extent of the DHHS approach to what they chronicled on their paperwork, that boy showered with a registered sex offender, Jessica's uncle. That is the full extent of their concern, their approach to, and their dealing with pedophilia. Perpetrated and acknowledged as perpetrated on the DHHS file by none less than somebody that spent 10 to 15 years at a minimum in prison already for having had 5 counts of gross sexual assault. Where then does Attorney Jacqueline Gomes stand here? Where is there a tribunal? Where is there a court of law that can appropriately deal with the magnitude of the depth of the depravity of this case and the partners and the participants and the co-conspirators in this case? Attorney Jacqueline Gomes, the different social workers, the school social worker, Katie Sancare, Southern Maine Hospital, a nurse accusing Tucker of being violent and Moses as being violent and how they had to be escorted. That was a perjury. We did not have to be escorted. We recorded the conversation and we left, knowing that she peremptorily ordered us out of the emergency room. That's a perjury committed should that woman come to court, appropriately should that woman come to court someday. The nurse, Emily, of Southern Maine Hospital, in the annotation in their report concerning the visit of Moses and Tucker, made a statement, and I need to find it, but made a statement very unequivocally clear that they had to be escorted, Moses and Tucker, from the hospital. Not so. No such sound of a voice of a security guard or any police officer telling us what to do, how we needed to leave. Not at all. Just the astonished statement of amazing that she would order us out when we are trying to address the 72-hour limit that is needed within which to connect this perpetrator with the white material in the groin of this child. Nurse Emily actually saying, what are you trying to do? Have me try to make a connection between this man and what's here with this child? That's not going to happen. That's in effect, her message. It's all been placed over with Dr. Ritchie. He'll decide what he's going to do, meaning if it happens within 72 hours so we can determine whether it's his sperm or whether it happens outside the 72 hours, in which case it's impossible to connect that perpetrator with the child. That's outside of my purview. You need to leave the emergency room right now. So we have all of these different actors in the Don Juan Moses versus Jessica Pinkerton case, all of whom should be called into a court someday. But let's look at Jacqueline Gomes and finish this talk. Jacqueline Gomes, the attorney for Don Juan Moses, was warned by a social worker, don't further press the concern about a child who is not Don Juan Moses' child. That's not within your purview as an attorney. It's not within your purview as a citizen dealing with your children. What was Jacqueline Gomes to do? She had a moral dilemma, didn't she? She faced a challenge of her life. One of several, no doubt, one of perhaps many. Would she do the right thing? And what would the right thing be, pray tell, citizen? Do you know? This lawyer who deals with children knows, and that's all that matters. It is a law that anyone dealing with children must report abuse to the police if they see it, particularly if it's obvious pedophilia, confessed directly by a mother regarding her own son to the DHHS, particularly if that person who is responsible for the welfare of children is not just a school teacher or a nurse or a doctor or somebody that's dealing with children in a playground or at school or a school social worker, but it's a social worker herself who's responsible to evaluate and investigate physical and sexual abuse of children. That's who was recording this event. The DHHS must report to the police. Immediately report to the police that a child showered with a registered sex offender. Chief Janine Roberts tells us in the recorded interview, no such connection was made in any respect to the DHHS concern about Jessica Pinkerton and Don Juan Moses. Whether DHHS contacted the police or not is not within my understanding to know. But the fact that Jessica Pinkerton was never investigated concerning this pedophilia incident, the fact that Don Juan Moses was not called in to evaluate that, since he was the one bringing the accusation up to DHHS once the children were taken from him and taken into custody by Jessica under DHHS auspices. It was clear that if an investigation had taken place concerning pedophilia, Don Juan Moses would have been called in because he was the one bringing up the allegation that Jessica confirmed. And a proper investigation would have discovered that Don Juan Moses was not the only one told, nor Jessica, but the other adults were the pedophile and the wife, who's the babysitter, and Jessica's mother, who was the other babysitter, who would farm the children out over to Carol, the other babysitter, when she couldn't do it, and her husband. All four of which parties were naturally horrified when the boy said, "Broski and I shower right here," and were not going to do what Don Juan Moses wanted to do when he spoke with Jessica on the way home that night. After seeing the child point to that shower handicapped accessible shower, saying Broski and I shower right here at 3 years of age, give or take, but clearly coherent enough to know what he was talking about. Jessica was the only person who could have changed that, because she was the one that had a choice. Am I going to have the convenience of 2 babysitters that will place my children and my child and or children in jeopardy? Or will I do the right thing and not allow my child to be babysat at a registered sex offender's house because the child has already been molested by that pedophile? And that is confessed by Jessica, and that is confessed by DHHS. Those are 2 witnesses, Jessica and DHHS, in addition to Don Juan. 3 witnesses verifying pedophilia. It's conclusive, it's absolute. It was never addressed in a proper investigatory way to lead to a proper dealing with that matter by the police. Because had they properly involved themselves, Don Juan Moses would have to have been involved. So we know conclusively that the police have never touched this and may never even have heard of it directly from DHHS. However, since September of 2018, they have heard about it from Jonathan Tucker. Jonathan Tucker has addressed the chief of police on this matter. She has decried the matter as having been something that needs to be dealt with at other levels, but not hers. That it doesn't fall under her jurisdiction now that the children are somewhere else. She abdicated responsibility for what was supposed to have happened 2 years ago and failed to be transparent and open with citizens regarding what, under her watch, she should have known about from DHHS back in 2017 when the matter was broached to the DHHS. The failure of Chief Janine Roberts, to be forthcoming about that necessity for transparency is what now impugns her own integrity as the chief of police in Westbrook. More than that, it impeaches her integrity, because her integrity is based on a proper communication with the citizenry concerning the health and safety of our children. That's one of the things that she is duty-bound, that she is morally bound to oversee and to protect. Judge Cashman never had a chance to learn about the dereliction of attorney Jacqueline Gomes. She kept the trial compressed to the compass of 2 days, and therefore was never needing to investigate the details of each of these partners in crime. The DHHS file was incriminating enough so that the attorney, Jacqueline Gomes, was not necessary to arrive at trial. Why? Because, again, there are 3 witnesses attesting to facts in evidence. There's Don Juan Moses, the accuser, Jessica affirming the accusation, saying it only happened once, and DHHS amazingly, presumptuously, in its hubris of unbridled, overweening sense of immunity from prosecution. So accustomed to abandoned disregard for people and for the interests of children even, despite its profession to be child protectors, that they state in the record what is affirmed by Moses and Pinkerton, that Mason showered with Jessica's uncle, who's a registered sex offender, brazenly presuming that they wouldn't be scrutinized for what they have written down, brazenly presuming that the police will never have to be contacted, callously indifferent to the plight of these children, which they are commissioned to protect and defend. The Attorney General's office needs to know that the particular social workers who were aware of this sex offender showering with a then 3-year-old boy, who continues to be, at the writing of the DHHS document in 2017, babysat at the house of that same pedophile. The Attorney General needs to know that whichever social workers were aware of this pedophilia and failed to report it to the police and act upon that issue and adjudicate the case based on the evidence that Jessica Pinkerton is demonstrating a depraved indifference regarding her child, whichever social worker extended that depraved indifference and embraced that depraved indifference toward the children by letting that child continue to be babysat at that house, whichever social worker or workers was aware of this or responsible for this, including the immediate manager, need to be investigated, need to be cited by name. In addition to facing the crime perpetrated by the DHHS supervisors in employing a 20-year conflict of interest investigator, Christine Lynn Ash, intimate friends with Jessica Pinkerton and her family, further complicated by another conflict of interest inasmuch as Christine Lynn Ash's mother is the manager of the place where Jessica Pinkerton's parents live, and where Jessica Pinkerton with Don Juan Moses at one time had lived, and where also this social worker, Christine Lynn Ash, at least at one time lived. So we have a conflict of interest that is multi-layered, particularly given the fact that the manager of that apartment complex is close friends with Jessica Pinkerton's mother, who is the other of the two accusers, Jessica and her mother being the two accusers against Don Juan Moses of being abusive. So we have a scenario of conflict of interest, particularly as you look at Jessica farming the children out to the grandmother, the mother, her mother, Doris Pinkerton Rush, and to Carol, James Buzzle's wife, Carol Buzzle, her aunt. So you have this desire on the part of Jessica to make sure that her children are babysat for free by people willing to do it, who are tied into a pedophilia issue, who are tied into an apartment complex managed by the mother of the social worker investigating the case, close friends with the family, and having no use for Don Juan Moses. Again, knowing full well that the two accusers against Don Juan Moses are Jessica Pinkerton and her mother, as Cheryl White, Jessica's aunt, attests. The mother had a lot to do with this matter. The mother had a lot to do, and those two accusers are the ones involved. And when it came to the allegation of the pedophilia, it was brought up in the hearing of the mother, according to Don Juan Moses. That can't be proven because it's not a fact written down, but what we do have is sufficient. We have three witnesses to this fact: Don Juan Moses, Jessica Pinkerton, and the DHHS file acknowledging that she stated that her son showered with a registered sex offender. Getting back to the attorney Jacqueline Gomes, we are simply noting that Jacqueline Gomes knows, working within the child abuse concerns as a defense attorney for Don Juan Moses initially, who refused to take on the role of prosecutor in defense of Don Juan Moses when the case changed from being against him, that closing, and now moving into a case of Moses versus Pinkerton. That attorney refused to step in and take hold of the facts, not the least of which, the central one, being that she, as an attorney, knew that she's responsible for children and the safety of children. And when she heard from a social worker that Jessica Pinkerton's uncle showered with her son Mason, regardless of whether it was concerning the children at hand in their own immediate case, it was the same mother of the other children who allowed in depraved indifference that child to shower with a pedophile. That attorney knew that her job was immediately to connect it to the police. She did not do so, because had she done so, Don Juan Moses would have been called into that investigation. There needs to be a trial that deals with these details. And perhaps if Don Juan Moses' neighbor, Karen Burke, who has the letter attesting to the fact that Jessica intended to kidnap the children and use the DHHS system and the housing system, perhaps Karen Burke will finally come clean and say, yes, I want to step up to the plate and have a proper dealing with this matter. I allowed myself to be tampered with as a witness by the police. Yes, I have a sheriff, a person who's a relative of mine, or two in the sheriff's office, and I tried to use them to defend against me coming to court. And yes, I'm going to offend some people if I do what I have to do, but I'm going to do the right thing given what I'm hearing here from Jonathan Tucker. I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to step up, and I'm going to say, listen, I'm going to the police with Don Juan Moses to say, and to the DHHS with Don Juan Moses and say, Jessica planned to do all of this. And I'm going to the Attorney General, and I'm going to tell the Attorney General what I was willing to attest at court at one point. And then I was tampered with so that I refused to go later. Wouldn't it be nice if Karen Burke decided to do the right thing and put aside all of her fears, all of her concerns about people that she's going to offend, put aside all of her concerns about how inconvenient it would be to come to court, put aside all her concerns about how she's going to be under the spotlight publicly when she loves her privacy, how she can be dragged through the mud by people looking at the fact that she has had domestic violence issues. I get it. But wouldn't it be lovely if she could step up and do the right thing? The way she challenged Jessica Pinkerton so beautifully and nobly that day, saying, I'm not going to my trailer. I'm involved now because you have made me involved. That was integrity. That was integrity in action, saying, no, you guys need to separate. But not with you taking the children, Jessica, through the DHHS and accusing him of violence. You just need to go. And Don, you love the children. You take care of the children. This lady wants her sex. Let her go. That's why Karen Burke, the next door neighbor, called her an SLUTCUNT. And Don Juan Moses was not told explicitly what she was doing or the name of the person, but the next door neighbor, a woman, calling another woman a SLUTCUNT, knowing that she just produced a hair between her teeth of a pubic variety, that she immediately, upon surprised utterance, exclaimed was from her playing with the children, and she got a hair from her mulatto older son. Well, that's not the same texture and feel and size, naturally, of a male, adult male's hair, genital hair. She had it between her teeth on one of those delayed returns to the house, coming back from work. And as Karen Burke so astutely said in a recorded conversation with you, Don Juan Moses, Karen Burke said she wouldn't have had that there all day. That happened after work. Confirming why she came home late every day, as Cheryl White states in her own interview. So Cheryl White, as the babysitter, knew this, as aunt to Jessica Pinkerton. Wouldn't it be nice if Karen Burke were willing to step in and say, yes, I was tampered with. And I'm going to be my own person, and I'm not going to be beaten up by the police or controlled by them or controlled by my desire to please some of my relatives in the sheriff's department, who will have to eat crow because they were the ones issuing the subpoena for her to come to court. And she was the very one stating by text as well as by a recorded message that I have with her, stating, I have relatives over there, so if you want me to come to court, it ain't going to happen. Which is an amazing statement. But wouldn't it be nice if she were able to embrace all of this mess and say, listen, let me head straight toward this monster instead of running from it. I'm going to face my demons. And we'll all face our demons together with this whole matter. And say, listen, enough is enough. Let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to tell the truth. Yes, I'm going to tell the truth. She did come over to my house and told me 6 months before the children were taken under accusation of abuse that she intended to take the trailer or get housing, take the children, and dump Don Juan Moses. And wouldn't it be nice if Karen Burke could tell us more and tell us what she knew, if anything, about the particulars? Or maybe she knew nothing about the adultery explicitly, but she could just read another sister and tell that she was false with Moses. She certainly was false that day in front of her. And that's why Karen Burke exposed Jessica for her falseness. Trying to give him a kiss, Karen Burke could not stand it. And for that, Karen Burke, I thank you. That you couldn't stand the fact that Jessica wanted to go and kiss Don Juan Moses, knowing that Jessica had told you within months before that she intended to leave him, take the children, and get housing, or get his house from him. And yet she's trying to press in for a kiss, having exposed a pubic hair in her teeth that she had just acquired during 15 minutes of activity with another man whose semen was in her underwear that was pressed into the hamper on regular occasions when Don Juan Moses reached back in later after she passed through and verified. And she would never admit she was cheating. And she's been living now with that man for 2 years. Wouldn't it be amazing if Karen Burke would be willing to help these helpless children and put aside her ego, her concern for her own exposure, her concern for offending relatives, her fear of calling out the local police, if that exists. I don't think it does. I think Karen's a very bold woman, not afraid to speak her mind. I gather that very clearly. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the same compassionate intervention that she displayed toward Moses and Jessica in that crisis in the back, in the front yard there of the trailer, between their two trailers in Westbrook, Maine, wouldn't it be wonderful if she'd had the same compassionate intervention for these children today at the higher level, at the appeal court level? Wouldn't it be wonderful if she would be willing to come in as a witness? One of the witnesses that Judge Cashman had dismissed, or as Don Juan Moses put it, discarded. 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 What an amazing thing. Judge Cashman discarded the witness, Karen Burke. Judge Cashman considers these children cash cows only. She does not recognize the need to protect these children by getting at the facts and doing what Chief Janine Roberts putatively stated she would do in her phone call. I will follow wherever the facts lead me. A true judge must do the same thing that Chief Janine Roberts purports to have done, but has not done. Chief Janine Roberts demonstrated the same depraved indifference at her own level that the judge displayed at hers. Judge Deborah Cashman decided that it was not important to have witnesses come in to verify the condition of the children, the welfare of the children. And when I brought to the attention of the judge the reprehensible and unconscionable nature of excluding witnesses or brusquely obstructing their full utterance, interfering with the full interchange of the cross and direct examination, and especially of blocking certain witnesses from even appearing in court. And I mentioned Karen Burke in particular. She said, I do not know who Karen Burke is. And that was a denial of my opportunity and that of Don Juan Moses to then identify who Karen Burke is. I think Karen Burke would be upset about that. I think that Karen Burke, in her better nature, would understand how corrupt this situation is, and would have as much outrage concerning the abuse of power by this judge as she demonstrated concerning the abuse of power of Jessica Pinkerton, planning to milk the system as she has done for the last 2 years. And I would think that Karen Burke would express the same outrage that this woman continues to abuse the system, now allowing a man to live, to freeload off the state and the taxpayers, and particularly knowing that this man has open season now of immunity from prosecution, made such illegally and criminally by Judge Cashman, to do as he pleases with those children now, insulated from scrutiny by a judge's gavel. I would think that Karen Burke when she considers that the predator, the perpetrator, lives at that house and has open access to these children who are not his children, and who has demonstrated that he hates that older boy, and that he loves the delicate morsel, that 3-year-old autistic girl, a little too much. I think Karen Burke will be just as angry about that, and that she will come to the plate, and that she will do a Mickey Mantle, that she will do a Babe Ruth and hit that ball up into the grandstand and say, I'm not going to remain aloof from this situation. I have been drawn in by Jessica. She told me she was going to use the system. I'm going to bring to a screeching halt in America the abuse by women who want to game the system at my taxpayer expense and that of others, to use their children as cash cows, as prostitutes with the state. I'm going to expose the state prostitution of our children and of mothers self-prostitution by using themselves in the interest of creating cash cow children for the state, for themselves, and for the adoption agencies, depending on whether the children move from that home to another. We will not make merchandise of our children. And as I told Judge Cashman in court, the time has come in America where badges and robes must come off in the interest of protecting our helpless children.